Hello everyone, good afternoon. It is a very windy afternoon today, and I have a cat who doesn't want to go outside, who's making a guest appearance in this video, and also why the lighting isn't as good because I can't turn around. So I will just run you through the books that I finished in October. So I finished 6 books. 2 of them were advanced readers copies and that I read on my Kindle, and I'll start with them first I think, and then I'll go on to, I read another book on my Kindle and then I read 3 physical books. So the 2 that I read on my, that were advanced readers copies that I read on my e-reader were both kindly provided to me by the publishers via NetGalley. And opposite ends of the spectrum. One of them I gave 1 star, one of them I gave 5 stars. The first book that advanced readers copy that I read on my e-reader was Period Queen by Lucy Peach. This is a book. It is a book. It's a book by a woman who has a show in Australia that's all about like embracing your natural cycle and your period and stuff like that, and I was like, this sounds really interesting, you know. It sounds a bit I don't think I've read any books similar to it, but I know of books that are similar to it, like there's one called Vagina, I think Hannah Witton's written one. I was like, I'm interested, let's read it, and I didn't like it at all. I thought it was marketed as an adult book, and actually was very much, felt like it was geared towards, like, I would say even pre-teens, like not even teens. I would say like 9-10-year-olds. It was very like, there were lots of exclamation points and lots of like, you can do it, and I was like, if this book is written for like a 26-year-old, like I would be like, I've had a period for like 15 years, I probably know the basics, and I probably don't need to be like told that it should empower me, because it was like, harness your womanhood, and I was like, well, first of all, you know, not all people who get periods are women, not all women get periods, like, oh, it was just, yeah, it annoyed me. It annoyed me a lot. I wrote kind of a rant review on Goodreads, but it was still quite professional, so if you want to read that, I'll post it below. But basically the things that I didn't like about it were, it was marketed as an adult book and it was not an adult book. It felt kind of lazy in terms of like, there were lots of bullet points, so, and a lot of them were like, there was advice, but it was like painfully obvious advice, like eat chocolate, own a water bottle, take painkillers, and I was like, yes. I also really disagree with the idea of, at one point she was like, oh, you know, we shouldn't associate motherhood with, like, we shouldn't tie motherhood to womanhood so much, because women are women without being mothers, like you don't, it's not an essential part of being a woman. I was like, yes, that's true, like we shouldn't define women by our reproductive capabilities. But then she also was like, let's define women by our reproductive capabilities even when we're not reproducing. It was like, we don't need to define women by our biology and like our uteruses, and it was like, so I think, yeah, having like female empowerment and like periods tied together, I don't think is necessarily a good idea. Also, and then she was like, oh, this is how we end period stigma, and I was like, you can't just throw female empowerment at period stigma and expect period stigma to go away, because it's a lot more structural than that. And to be fair, she did address that, but as an aside, and it was very much like the whole, I felt like the whole premise of the book was like female empowerment and periods being tied together, which is why it's called Period Queen, I guess. I'm not a period queen, I am just a woman who gets periods and doesn't want them to define my life, because they don't. Yeah, there was a bit when she was like, medical professionals underdiagnose endometriosis, which is true, and then she was like, well, just try another doctor. and you deserve not to feel pain, which is, you should, you don't deserve to feel pain, but like that is true, but you're not addressing these things in like a complex way that adult women deserve in this book. And also there was like the whole premise of it was like you split her period cycle into like a 4-week thing, or it was like do, dream, give, take, which was like theoretically based on your hormones. And we can go over like the hormone bit and the fact that we don't biologically, like, we know what hormones do, like in terms of what they trigger in the body, but we don't necessarily know the effects on the brain, because we don't know anything about neurology, because neurology is so complex and difficult and such like a crazy science that it just doesn't work. And I feel like this book is just so underdeveloped, so basic and so mid-noughties feminism and lazy, and oh yes. So I think we are past that as a society. She also cited like Charles Darwin, and I was like, Charles Darwin was big misogynist. Let's not, like, he did good stuff, but he was also a big misogynist, so maybe don't cite him when you're talking about women. So that was one of the books that was kindly given to me for free by the publisher. So apologies to that. I generally don't give books 1 star. If I don't like a book, I generally put it down, but I don't think, even if I had bought that book, I think I still would have given it the review I had, because it really annoyed me. So the other book that I got for review was Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters, and this was excellent. Gave it 5 stars. I've been very excited about this since I heard about it, which was only like a month ago, and then I requested it on NetGalley, and then they gave it to me, and I was like, this is so exciting. So this book is a novel, and it is about 3 women. So there's a man who, like, someone who was living as a man who had previously been a trans woman, and then he detransitioned, which is why it's called Detransition Baby. He had managed to get his current girlfriend pregnant, and hadn't realised that he could do it because he thought he was sterile. And then he's like, oh, I don't think I can be a father because gender is messy, and it's like difficult to pass, like, you know, gender, it's crazy. And so he's like, oh, my ex-girlfriend, who's a trans woman, really wants a baby. So he kind of he introduces this idea of them parenting as like a triad of people. Ultimately, it's like, it doesn't get to having the baby, it doesn't really work out the logistics or anything like that, but it's kind of interrogates what these 3 women, well, 2 women, 1 living as a man, but kind of, it's not, the reasons for Ames's detransition are very much, he didn't feel safe as a trans woman, and kind of also felt kind of unsure about his femininity. And it's just, I really liked that bit of it, because I think I know detransitioning can be like weaponized against the trans community, and for it to be shown in such like an empathetic way, I thought was, and like a really understandable, I think was something that I'd never thought of before. And I've read quite a few books about gender, and yeah, and I really liked that bit of it. I also really liked the trans woman's character, Reese. I thought she was great. She has some really like biting commentary. She's also like really, they're all really well done characters, like they're really fleshed out, they make messy mistakes, you understand why they do it. It's kind of a close third person that kind of switches between them, so you understand what they're trying to do, even though they don't necessarily always manage it. So it's always quite explicit, like what they're feeling. and why they're feeling it, which I think is a really good way to write fiction, because you get further into the characters and it means that you empathise with them more and you like them more, even though they're making like messy decisions. And this whole like idea is wild, you know, it's not something that I'd ever really, you know, you look at the premise of the book and you're like, oh, that's interesting. But it really worked, like it really works. It's really, I think it's really important to show motherhood as something that is up, you know, it can be reimagined, parenthood can be reimagined, and that queer people and trans people deserve to have that experience should they want it. Yeah, and it was really good. I would say it is got incredibly well fleshed out characters that are likeable and you like to spend time around them. It's very funny. It's also written really well, like the prose is really good, and pacing is good. Yeah, I would really recommend it. So that was that one. Then I read a ebook that I bought called There Is a Light by Gilmartin, which is a male-male romance set in Edinburgh, and a lot of people had read this and were like, it's nice, and I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was a bit long. I thought it was a bit sad. Like both the main characters have kind of issues in terms of one of them has quite severe depression and the other one has addiction problems, and I was very like, I was really invested in the guy who had, especially the guy who had addiction problems. I was like, oh, he's really like sweet and I really like connect with him. And then the other guy, I was like, he's nice, he's a bit sad, like I know he's depressed. Like I don't really necessarily want to read about that like for lots and lots of pages, and yeah, so I kind of liked it, but I thought it was a bit of a bummer and a bit too long, and which isn't necessarily what I want in a romance book. So there you go. If you want something that's like sad and funny and emotional romance, go for it, but generally when I'm looking for romance I look for something that's more like light and fluffy. So that is my review of that book. I then read 3 non-fiction books, 2 of which are here. The other one is on my fiction shelf because it's an Ali Smith book, so I put it with all my Ali Smith, even though that is the fiction shelf or bookcase. So the Ali Smith book is Artful, and it's basically a series of essays that Ali Smith wrote about time and form and a couple of other things, and kind of it's a bit her critiquing and like delving into works of art, whether they be paintings or poems or bits of prose, and kind of just her way of like intertwining it all together. There's also a narrative that runs through it, and in the fact that the narrator of the book is discovering these essays as the work of someone who had died, who was very close to the narrator. I wasn't sure how much of it, because this book is non-fiction, tagged as non-fiction on Goodreads, and the essays that she has written she has given at like speaking events. I wasn't sure how much of it was fiction and how much of it non-fiction, but anyway, regardless, I enjoyed this book. I wouldn't say it's my favourite of Ali Smith's. I generally prefer her fiction, which I know before because I think the Public Library is non-fiction, and or like non-fiction essays, and I didn't like that as much either. So generally I prefer Ali Smith's fiction, but either way, me working through Ali Smith's back catalogue is always a good time. So I gave that 4 stars, I think. Yeah, 4 stars, probably 3.5. And then I read these 2 books. there you go, there's the thumbnail. These two books I read: How to Argue with a Racist and How to Do Nothing. How-to books. How to Do Nothing I read first. This is a kind of a book all about how capitalism takes all of our attention away, and how you can kind of reclaim it, not in particularly practical ways, but in terms of like you can choose to disengage, not in terms of like putting your phone away, but in terms of like critiquing things that you read and not reading them all the time, and understanding that tweets are not the way that you can really communicate information, because there's something called context collapse, where you are reading something, you're reading lots of things that are like 100, how many are they now, 280 characters long. That's not something you can really like imbibe and take in and understand in a way that is good for you, and it's just kind of something that really just does your attention span in, basically. So I put capitalism, rewilding. So there's stuff about in here about nature and how we need to reconnect with nature, and how engaging with nature is a way of slowing down and kind of understanding more about yourself through that. There's some discussion about art, which I always really enjoy. I always enjoy reading discussion about art, and Jenny Odell is an artist and a writer, so she has the credentials to do so. And yeah, so I really enjoyed that bit. Social media and marketing, so how marketing is basically designed to target your attention span and do bad things to you, basically. So I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 5 stars. I'm not sure if I put anything more in my Goodreads review. I'll look. I put, this book was like a perfect intersection between talking about art, environmentalism, non-disingenuous self-care and anti-capitalism. Really enjoyed it. So if that sounds like something you'd like to read, I would go for it. It's a bit more rambling than I think some people would have thought by the title, but I like a good rambling non-fiction book. I like thoughts, not my own necessarily sometimes. And the next one that I read, and also the last one that I will be talking about, is How to Argue with a Racist by Adam Rutherford. This is a book that's all about race science and what bullshit it is, in kind of a way that complements Angela Saini's Superior, which I read last year or the year before, that I really enjoyed. And this is kind of a bit like that, but more genetics. So Adam Rutherford is a geneticist, and he kind of goes through how race is not something that can be really like backed up by science and genetics. There is no such thing as like a one gene that makes you black or white. It's all like different genes that all switch different things on that we don't understand at all, because everything's much more complicated than you can possibly understand. And the way in which we simplify these things, like biology lessons, I mean, I guess they're a good way of like understanding the basics, but they're not they shouldn't be used to base terrible bigoted ideas like racism on. So yeah, it's all about, you know, your genetics are more closely tied to your location than they are to your race, what we understand as race. There's a lot about history in here, and like where people moved. There's a great footnote in here about how about the bit where Danny Dyer in Who Do You Think You Are found out he was related to like Edward the II, and then Adam Rutherford basically goes back and says, yeah, this footnote he basically goes back and says, if you like are a white European in the UK today, you were probably also related to Edward III. It's not just Danny Dyer, because of the way we think about family trees is so like like that kind of thing, when actually it's like ooh. And like some of these people over here might also be some of these people over here. They might be the same person, and you kind of just like there's like lattices interlocking, and the way he describes it is that instead of having it as like a family tree, you have it as like a family, like not bush but like a bramble patch. There was a bit where he said someone had come up to him and been like, I know you say this, but actually every single one of my descendants has come from this very, very small place. And Adam Rutherford was like, well, that's not true, because if they did, you would be dangerously interbred. And I think that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. So that was that. I would really recommend reading it if you're interested in these kinds of things. People fixated on finding biological basis for racial differences appear more interested in the racism than the science, which I think is a very good way to put it. So yeah, and I like being reminded sometimes that science is very, very complicated, and the world is much bigger than you can never think about everything, and sometimes it's nice to think about something that I don't really know that much about, and like understand what an expert thinks about it in like probably a much more simpler way than how he, like, you know, usually thinks about it, because he's a very clever man, I'm sure, and is very much an expert in genetics, whereas I am not. So yeah, and also it's quite funny. There are some nice dry jokes in there about the guy not being interbred, and yeah, I would really recommend it. It's also quite short. It's only a couple of 100 pages long, so I'd recommend that. They are all the books that I read in October. Yes, it was pretty good reading month for me, I think. So I hope you all had a very good October reading month. Hope you're all doing very well, especially in the UK. I know we are heading into a second lockdown potentially, so I hope you are okay as a person. If you would like to chat in the comments, I'm always here to do so, and yeah, see you next week potentially, or you know, whenever. Bye.